It's a
It's a Substack
fantastic.
Live, and we're live right now. And I
Oh.
try to be the Substack whisperer, folks. I try to bring on the hesitant folks to Substack. And Rabbi Jill Jacobs, CEO of Trua, a fantastic person who also wrote a great article recently in the Forward, correct? Was it where I read it?
Mhm.
Is on Substack Live to talk about why there are rabbis in New York being arrested by the NYPD for protesting what is happening in Gaza right now, where the Israeli regime under Netanyahu is committing war crimes and starvation. And for those people who think that Jews and Arabs and Jews and Muslims and Jews and Palestinians are at perpetual loggerheads from the beginning of time until the end, it's complete nonsense. Those pro-peace rallies for the past year and a half, folks, for the end to war, for the release of hostages, many times they were led by Jews. When people were saying not in our name, those were Jews. And right now we have Rabbi Jill Jacobs, who was one of the rabbis who was arrested just a few days ago, and has written some fantastic pieces actually calling upon. And I really appreciate this piece you wrote. I think it was a couple of weeks ago, where you were talking about the silence of certain so-called representatives of American Jews, those leaders who have been silent about the atrocities that we have all witnessed in real time happening in Gaza right now. And so, thank you so much, Rabbi, for joining us. And first and foremost, I want to ask you, why did you decide to be a masochist and get yourself arrested a few days ago?
Okay, well, the first thing that I want to say is that often we talk we talk in dichotomies, right? So it's that you're pro-Palestine if you're against the war, and if you're pro-Israel, you must be for the war. And one thing I just want to say straight out is that most Israelis do not want this war. The last polls are something like 75% of Israelis think that the war should end. And that's been consistent. I mean, it's been growing, but consistently for a very long time that most Israelis want this war to end. And in fact, have been out in the street protesting, sometimes hundreds of thousands of them on a given Saturday night for a ceasefire, hostage deal, end to the war. And that's just been growing. So I just want to say that straight out because I do want to break down that dichotomy. So the group of rabbis, so the context was a protest that was organized by Trua, the organization I lead, which represents more than 2,300 rabbis across the United States and Canada, as well as a number of our partner organizations. And it was a protest for against the starvation of Gaza, because of course we've all been seeing these horrific pictures that have come out, which we knew, right? This is something that we've been warned about when there was a pause in anything getting into Gaza in the spring. Even a few days after the war, there was initially a siege on Gaza, right? So we've known that this disaster is coming, in addition to all of the people, more than 60,000, including 18,000 children who have been killed there. So we thought that it was important that there be rabbis and other Jews who are protesting outside the consulate who are specifically not people who define themselves as having a deep relationship with Israel. Most define themselves as Zionists. That's also a loaded word that we can talk about or not. Whatever qualifiers you want to put on that: progressive Zionist, liberal Zionist, use the word, don't use the word. But people who have deep connections to Israel, who are deeply concerned with the fate of the hostages, and who are deeply concerned with what's happening in Gaza right now, and particularly the starvation and the shootings of people seeking aid and the ongoing death and destruction. So we wanted to have that group of people protest. And to make even a bigger point, we wanted to have a minyan, which is basically a prayer quorum of 10 rabbis, be arrested. And there have, as you said, been many, many protests over the last couple of years, including in Israel, as I said, and in the United States. And the protests have had have come from different people and had different approaches. Some, not all of them, have been from people who don't have a connection to Israel and who perhaps are not talking about the hostages, in some cases even justifying the violence of October 7th. And we thought that it was really important that there be a protest from people who are saying, look, we want Israel to succeed as a country. We care about people who live in Israel, which includes both Jews and Palestinians and other people. We care about Palestinians who are living under occupation, and we can hold all of that. And specifically that we can hold the pain of the hostages and families whose family members were killed on October 7th, and families of Israeli soldiers who have been killed, and Palestinians who have been killed and their families, and families who are starving, and families who are displaced, that our hearts are big enough to hold all of that pain. So that was really the goal of the protest.
No, I appreciate that. And what have you heard from I would say, well, I'm assuming allies, but maybe they're not allies, from progressive activists, from Palestinians? Did they appreciate your gesture? Was there solidarity? I'm very curious.
Yeah, we've heard absolutely a lot of gratitude. And also, I think, as you alluded to, there was another protest last night in New York that I spoke at that was a broader coalition of still mostly Jewish, though also there were Palestinian speakers, but ranging from, let's say, people who would consider themselves progressive or liberal Zionists to people who would consider themselves anti-Zionist. But again, really focusing on the starvation in Gaza because we can come together around that. I know that there are people in both cases who had never been to a protest before, never been to a protest on this issue before, but felt so moved to come out to say that we just can't stand by while people in Gaza are starving.
And this within Jewish communities, and I think it's very important with our language. There's that famous joke. I know you've heard that there's 10 Jews, 11 opinions. Same goes for Arabs and Muslims. But there's Jewish communities, right? There's diversity of opinions. And within Jewish communities, how was the response to what you did?
We also, so we hear a mix, right? Because like you said, we usually say 2 Jews, 3 opinions. So then if it's 10, I don't know, I can't do the math that fast, but it's a lot. So yes,
17.
There's that many opinions, right? And I saw a fantastic quote by somebody. There was an article about, I think it was about Mamdani, and they interviewed somebody who's Jewish. And she said something like, well, I can't even agree with myself about Israel, so how am I going to agree with anybody else? And I thought that was actually perfect. So the response there has been a mix of response. I would say also there's a lot of gratitude. I think there's a lot of Jews who have felt like they're really increasingly uncomfortable with what's happening. They're increasingly uncomfortable with the voices that are coming out of some legacy organizations. I want to say legacy Jewish organizations because they don't necessarily represent the majority of Jews, but they're the ones that are 100 or more years old. So the legacy organizations, which have mostly been invested in defending the state of Israel and the government of Israel no matter what, which again is different than being pro-Israel. So there's a lot of Jews who have felt really uncomfortable with the language of the legacy organizations, who have felt very disturbed as this war drags on and with just mounting casualties as there are voices coming out of Israel. I mean, just this week, it was yesterday, a group of, I think, 10, a lot of former Israeli security personnel, like people who have been head of the IDF and head of Mossad, and put out a video saying this war is not serving any strategic purpose for Israel. It's a war of settlement. I'm paraphrasing, right? It's a war. It's an extremist war, and just like really fierce terms saying that this war needs to end immediately. I mean, already, but now immediately. There were a lot of voices, and there were also voices from parts of the Jewish community on the right and the left who were mad in one way or the other. So from some parts of the right, how dare you criticize Israel? You're just fomenting anti-Semitism. What about the hostages? Even though, of course, there was certainly talk about the hostages, but they weren't there to hear it. Defense of the talking points about, well, there actually is enough aid. The starvation is just a kind of Hollywood scheme, all those kinds of things that we hear. Again, not a huge number of people, but we did hear that. And then from some parts of the far left, there were criticisms that we wouldn't even bring up the hostages at all, or that we do consider ourselves as people who are invested in the future of Israel, right? So like wherever you stand, you're going to get criticism from somewhere. But I would say overwhelmingly, the response from most of the Jewish community has been, this is what I wanted. I mean, like I said, we had hundreds of people show up who, most of them, I don't think have been to a protest about the war yet in the last 2 years. But they were looking for a place to be.
And I think what's so important, just as an observer watching this and seeing this play out and how this is playing out and going to play out, and we'll talk about that, right? How just the remarkable changing shift in perception in America and around the world when it comes to its relationship with Israel or its views of Israel, right? Is the fact that there's rabbis. The fact that, rabbi is a spiritual leader and speaks with a spiritual language, ethical language, a moral language, and then to see that type of spiritual leadership uh, come out and take such a stance against what the overwhelming majority of people are seeing as just war crimes, right? I consider it a genocide. So does Amnesty. So does Omar Bartov. Came out with a really strong opinion piece in the New York Times last week. He's one of the preeminent scholars on the Holocaust and genocide, right? Or at the very least, as Ehud Olmert, former Prime Minister of Israel, folks, said this is a senseless war and they're committing war crimes, right? That's Ehud Olmert. But the reason why, and you wrote this piece right before you were before you were arrested, called "Gaza is Starving. Where are the American Jewish leaders?" I thought was a very strong piece. And then the byliner to that was privately Jewish lay leaders are anguished over Gaza. Publicly, they fear being labeled anti-Semitic. Can you talk about the private conversations of this fear? Because at the end of the day, I understand community politics. Nobody wants to be exiled. Nobody wants to be ostracized. Nobody wants to be seen as a sellout. Nobody wants to air dirty laundry, right? And already there's many Jews who are Zionists who feel besieged, like, oh shit, what's happening in Zoran Mamdani? War crimes, people using the word genocide, the poll numbers, Jill, shut up. Why are you putting a more of a target on Israel's back? Why do you hate us? I'm just curious.
Yeah.
Talk to us about that what you said, that the publicly they fear
Okay.
being labeled anti-Semitic.
Yeah. Okay. So there's a lot of questions in there. So I'm going to try to pull some of them out. So first of all, I want to say that there was a lot of hurt in the Jewish community right after October 7th, when there was a faction of the left that justified, in some cases, celebrated uh, the attacks of October 7th, and which killed and kidnapped civilians, and there was denial, and of course the ripping down of the hostage posters. So there is a lot of real hurt there. And I run a rabbinic organization, and I hear stories all the time from rabbis who are saying, well, I used to have a really close relationship with this minister down the street, and he never called me after October 7th, and we really haven't spoken since, or the relationship's broken. Lots of stories. Also, there's been rising anti-Semitism. So synagogues that have been graffitied, bomb threats, and of course the horrific murders in DC and in Boulder, and the firebombing of Governor Shapiro's home on Seder night. So so there is real anti-Semitism and there is real fear out there. So I just don't want to diminish that. And there is, and a lot of that is a response to what's happening in Israel, and people who are don't want to distinguish between, I don't think it's actually hard to be able to say this government of this sovereign nation is committing war crimes, and to say the people should not be dehumanized. I mean, we're able to do that for other places, right? So we can be mad at China about the Uyghurs or about COVID, but we shouldn't be harassing Chinese Americans on the street or Chinese nationals on the street, right? You can go on and on with examples. Americans, I hope, when
It
we
happened
travel
during
abroad.
COVID. We saw the rise in hate crimes
Yeah,
against Asian Americans for something they were
100%.
completely unresponsible for.
Yeah, and most of us were able to just condemn that straight out. So there has been unfortunately, people who take out their anger about Israel on Jews, and that is anti-Semitic. There's also a fear. I think this comes from generations of trauma, that if there's any cracks in the system, like if Israel is criticized at all, then that is essentially delegitimizing the whole country, and it's dangerous for Jews. And people take it very personally. That any have a sense of like an attack on Israel is an attack on me, and people are worried about their friends and their family there. So there is that very real sense. Now, again, I think that one can distinguish between criticizing the actions of a sovereign nation and dehumanizing the people. And I will also say very specifically that within the Jewish community, when you look at polling from the Jewish community, you find out that the vast majority of Jews have deep connections to Israel, and also the vast majority of Jews hate the government, hate Netanyahu, um, are against occupation, against settlement. They're pro two states, right? You find that all out, but you wouldn't necessarily know that if you just listen to the legacy organizations. And which are because in part, this is not entirely, but in part, donors, this is true in so many sectors, but large donors have an outside influence
Oh yeah.
and really can push the agenda. And we found, so TRUA, the organization I lead, we came out with a statement in December 2023 calling for negotiations toward a bilateral ceasefire. And this was after the initial ceasefire at the end of November 2023. I was actually in Israel for it, which was just amazing and powerful, when more than 100 hostages came home and when Gaza got 10 days, I believe, of relief from bombings, and people were able to, in some cases, even go home and just get that kind of relief. So right after that, we put out a statement calling for, like I said, negotiations toward a bilateral ceasefire. So hostages home, end of attacks in Gaza, end of missiles flying into Israel. And we got both publicly and privately attacked. But the thing that was actually, I don't know if it was surprising, but it was definitely had a big impact, was that we started getting calls from our rabbis, our rabbi members, who were getting calls from major Jewish community funders, not funders of TRUA, but funders of other institutions, in some cases their institutions, saying, basically, you need to drop your membership in TRUA, in some cases actually lying about us. I got an email from one rabbi who said, I heard that you put my name on a letter calling for an immediate unilateral ceasefire. And I said, none of those things are actually true. We put out an organizational statement for a bilateral ceasefire, to which he responded, thanks for clarifying. Also, I forgot to make my donation this year. I'm going to do it right now, which was great. But some rabbis were actually intimidated because their funding was threatened, and we heard some of these funders were also smearing TRUA, both in public and in private. And we saw that that's for us as an organization, we're not getting right-wing funding, obviously, perhaps. Not, I'll say, obviously, we're not getting right-wing funding, but for institutions that do have to rely on funding from donors who are maybe a little to the right, that is very, very scary. And so I was having lots of private conversations with people, rabbis, Jewish community professionals, lay leaders, who were saying, essentially, that they're more and more disturbed by what was happening in the war. I started hearing this. Probably, I'd say the first couple of months, people were just in shock, but certainly by December, late November, December 2023, but I can't say it at work. I can't talk about it. It's too dangerous. I'm going to lose my job. I'm going to lose my funding. So that is a reality. And part of what I think that we are doing as an organization is, because we have the power of rabbis, we're able to say, look, there's another way. This is actually the majority voice of the Jewish community. It is not coming from outside of Judaism. It is not people who hate Judaism, but this is a majority voice that's telling a different story. And again, this is why I said legacy organizations, not mainstream organizations, because the mainstream of the Jewish community does not agree with the legacy organizations.
And I think that's very important, just to uplift your voice and other people's voices, because those who are in the weeds who don't know, these legacy organizations, which I'll name ADL, AIPAC, and others, have such an outsized influence that for those who don't know, they say, oh, look at ADL, that represents the Jews, apparently. It's allegedly a civil rights organization, right? That's perfectly fine with the unlawful detention of Mahmoud Khalil. That's perfectly fine with crushing universities. That's perfectly fine with aligning with, in my opinion, a right-wing anti-Semitic Trump administration, and has not become a civil rights organization, but seems to be a defender of Israel and its war crimes. And that represents the Jews, which in turn is terrible for Jews and terrible for Israel and terrible for multiracial movements against fascism, right? When you're weaponizing anti-Semitism to as a cudgel to go against democracy and protest, that is terrible for Jews. And I think it's really important what you said, that a majority of American Jews, they voted Democrat, they voted for Kamala Harris, they're against Benjamin Netanyahu, they're against the occupation. And Benjamin Netanyahu's base, folks, is not American Jews. Benjamin Netanyahu's base is white Christian evangelicals, Christian Zionists, people like, Christians United for Israel, Kufi, Pastor Hagee, and the MAGA supporters, and some of the right-wing Jews, right? And so, speaking about these institutions, yesterday I had Noah Shackman, who did a fantastic deep dive that I'm sure you read in Rolling Stones, where he interviewed more than 40 people, talking about how the ADL has lost its way. And echoing much of what you said is that so many people are saying, man, I want to speak out publicly, but this is just terrible. These organizations who believe, and it's this mindset, right, of the trauma of there's only 60 million Jews, anti-Semitism's real, we got to batten down the hatches, circle the wagons. When I was in Israel talking to some of these nutty settlers, that's the same language. The world hates us, batten down the hatches, security, 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 us versus the world. So this is what we got to do, and we got to crush all opposition, even if it's Jews. We're going to call them capos. We're going to call them self-hating Jews. We're going to call them traitors, and we got to do this. We got to go all in with Israel. Your take as an American Jew, American Jewish leader, a rabbi who also loves Israel, why, and if this is a leading question, please feel free to disagree with me. Clearly, I feel this is disastrous for the security of Jews, Palestinians, Muslims, democracy, and even the state of Israel.
Yeah. Look, the most protests I've been at in the last 2 years have been in Tel Aviv or Jerusalem. The last time I was in Israel, I went to 3 protests in 3 days on the streets of Tel Aviv. So that just kind of shows you where things are. And I mean, look, I don't want to, take away, obviously, I want to say again, right? More than 60,000 Palestinians have been killed, including 18,000 children. Children are starving, adults are starving. But when you look at what's happening in Israel, more than since the 1200, some people were killed on October 7th, including mostly Jews, but also Palestinian citizens of Israel and foreign workers. About 900 soldiers have been killed, and increasingly, I think there were about half a dozen suicides of soldiers, of veterans, in July. And that, I mean, I hope that it's not a trend, but it is in a very bad place. And we've seen just over the last few days, even soldiers protesting outside of military headquarters. And before that, we've had a group of parents of combat soldiers protesting. And, I saw this was like a painful, really painful sign. One of the times I was at a protest in the last couple of years, there was this group of parents of combat soldiers, and one of them had a sign that said, it was a play on, there's a very famous line, I won't go into the history, but very famous line that's in Hebrew that says, somebody was supposed to have said, as his last dying words, Tov lamut ba'ad artzeinu, like it's good to die for our country. And they had a pun on it that was Lo tov lamut ba'ad aritzenu, which means it's not good to die for our tyrants. And right in that sense of like, there is a real understanding that Israelis are basically sending off their 18-year-old children to be like cannon fodder, and that is horrific. And there's a real understanding, particularly after these horrible videos of 2 emaciated hostages came out in the last week, that everybody knows that military action kills hostages. And Netanyahu's announcement yesterday or the day before that he's going to that he's going to fully occupy Gaza, that he's going to have IDF activities, including in places where hostages are. Everybody understands that that will kill the hostages. And actually, the hostages are a nuisance to him. This is the other place where there's a real difference between what Israelis understand and what many American Jewish organizations are saying, that when Israelis have been saying for the past almost 2 years, bring them home, it's a directive aimed at their government, right? And you go in the protests, and the language is, that Israel has abandoned the hostages, blaming Netanyahu for that abandonment. There's an understanding that he doesn't care about them. He won't meet with their families, right? So on and on and on. Whereas I think sometimes in the U.S., the legacy Jewish organizations, when they say bring them home, it seems to be aimed at Hamas or Qatar or sort of the world at large, or like shouting into the wind, but it's not aimed at it's not aimed at the Israeli government. And some of the hostage families, particularly those who have been more outspoken, when they've come to the U.S., actually some of them tried to meet with Jonathan Greenblatt, and he's met with some hostage families, but some of the more outspoken ones he didn't meet with. I can say that because they've said it publicly. We've had strong statements by hostage families saying, American Jews, please make this war stop because it's killing our family members. And we have, for years and years, the Israelis who have lived by the Gaza border have been who are mostly, left-wing kibbutzniks, have been saying for years, the answer is not to build a higher wall. The only answer is a political solution, not a military solution. And so now we're seeing, here's a military solution. Tens of thousands of Palestinians have died, thousands of Israelis, and it's not making anybody any safer.
And in the family members of the hostages, for the last year or longer, have actually been vocally protesting Netanyahu, and have said that Netanyahu is the one that they blame for actually killing any negotiations or any swaps, because he doesn't care about the hostages. He wants to stay in power. And just yesterday, much like Donald Trump, Israel fired the attorney general that was trying to hold Netanyahu accountable. So Netanyahu needs the war, because as soon as the war ends, he will most likely, folks, be held accountable for numerous corruption charges, and he will definitely lose his seat in power and might even go to jail. So the war benefits him and a type of extremist vision of Israel. And speaking about political solutions, for the first time in my life, I was shocked to see, Rabbi, that 26 Democrats, if you include Bernie Sanders, 27, said, you know what, the United States is complicit. The United States has a role. Enough is enough. We've seen starving babies. Let's stop. Let's stop sending weapons that'll force this Netanyahu government, which is an extremist government, the most extreme government that we've ever seen in Israel. It'll force them to do the right thing. What was your take on the Democrats, many of them Jews, who said enough of the weapons being sent?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Americans very rightly are looking at what's being done with the weapons that are sent over, and also are seeing that Israel, there's a lot of rules about how countries are supposed to use military equipment that is military aid that comes from the United States. And Israel, there's virtually no transparency, and Israel's not held to the same standard. And, many of us have been saying for years that Israel should be held to the same standard as every other country. That's not calling for an end to aid to Israel. My organization doesn't call for an end to aid to Israel, but we do support transparency, and we support knowing that Israel is following the same rules. And I think that, the United States, it's very reasonably, people in the United States, including Democrats in Congress, are saying, look what's happening. These weapons are prolonging the war. I want to say that this was not about the Iron Dome or defense of Israel from missiles. This was about offensive weapons. And I think the question that everybody's asking is, what will actually get Netanyahu to the table? Because, like I said, most Israelis don't want this war. Even now, the head of the IDF, the newish head of the IDF, who came in after the old one was deemed to be, deemed to be no good because he was saying things that Netanyahu didn't want to hear about the war. Now you have all this, just really incitement against this new head of the IDF, right? Because he's also telling Netanyahu things that he doesn't want to hear. All Netanyahu wants to hear is, we're going to win the war. We have to continue the war. And so you see that now the head of the IDF again is being called a traitor for saying basically this war is not serving any strategic defense purpose. So I think that's the question. Is we have most of the Israeli public, we have all of these security professionals in Israel, we have various countries that have been trying to broker a ceasefire, but Netanyahu because he needs to keep his coalition together, and his coalition is dependent on extremists, and he himself is an extremist. That is the thing that is important to him. And of course, what these extremists really want is they want to be able to resettle Gaza. They have a really dangerous messianic vision that is putting everybody in the region at risk. And so I think that it is reasonable to say, well, are there levers that the United States can use to try to pressure Israel to end the war? And holding back offensive weapons is one that's been used, for many years, going back to the first George Bush.
Yeah, and folks, pardon me that I'm not reading your comments because my Substack is glitching. It says we're live, but it shows that we have 0 viewers. But I know for a fact there's more people watching. How many people are watching, Rabbi? I can't see anything right now. There's a glitch.
Mine says 730, but I also
wonderful. So
I
that's
can't see
great.
the
You're
comments
right.
either.
So pardon me. There's a glitch happening on Substack with my Samsung. But I see you, even though I don't see you, folks, and that's the reason why I'm not answering or reading your questions or comments, because I literally can't see it right now. But I'm glad. Thank you for all the people who've joined us. I do want to ask you this question, Rabbi. I was just talking to Adam, and I was talking to Noah Shackman yesterday. I strongly recommend people listen to that interview with Noah, where he did this deep dive into the ADL, and we talked. He's a Jewish American who cares deeply about his communities, about the damage, and the danger that so much of these pro-Israel organizations are doing to Jews and to American security and democracy, and to Israel and to Palestinians, and the future of, inshallah, some sort of Palestinian self-determination, whether that's 2 states or 1 state. It's not up for me to decide, but some form of equality. But what we're witnessing right now is a radicalization in real time. And I've only seen this once before. I was talking to Adam about how I saw it during the first Obama administration, the second Obama administration, when it came to marriage equality, like this remarkable shift when it came to the majority people. And for the past year and a half, I'm sure you've seen all the poll numbers that have come out, especially in the past 2 weeks, a remarkable shift on Israel that I never thought I'd see in my lifetime, where it's not just, Democrats, young people around the world, even many part of MAGA, right? America First, who are like, enough. We're done. Like, Israel is now an extremist state. We refuse to support it, right? You see, like, Israel has lost the youth. It's lost the majority of Democratic voters. It's lost young people all around America, all around the world. 300,000 Australians, I'm sure you saw that in Sydney, came out and marched against Israel, right? And so many people are saying that this is like, it reminds me of 80s South Africa apartheid, like things shifted just like that. But in addition to apartheid, there's also occupation. In addition to occupation, there's also violent extremist settlers in the West Bank. We haven't even talked about the West Bank. And there's a genocide in real time, right? So Israel is becoming increasingly in real time, as we're just witnessing, a pariah state, but a pariah state that has a very close relationship to the United States. And so many people, especially Americans, are so pissed off that our weapons, our money, our diplomatic support goes to this extremist government that not only is committing a genocide, but also occupying and expanding settlements. The question I have for you then is, when it comes to the future of Israel, if things don't change, how can you reconcile? And can you reconcile then being pro-Palestinian and pro-Israel if pro-Israel as it exists in this moment is an occupying force whose existence comes at the just shattering of the Palestinian people?
Yeah, so I want to also just break down what pro-Israel means, because it is true that Israel is increasingly becoming just a autocratic state. I mean, Israelis have been screaming about this for a year. Even before October 7th, they were in the street. And there's also a lot of autocratic states around the world, and a lot of states that are carrying out massive human rights violations, and some of them have deep relationships with the United States. I'll mention the Gulf states, for example. And I think the question is, can we distinguish between what the government of the state is doing, which includes occupation? We can maybe talk about the horrific violence in the West Bank in a second. And can we distinguish between that and the question of the actual people who live in the state? Because there's close to 10 million citizens of Israel who are about 80% Jewish and 20% Palestinian. And there's another 5 million or so Palestinians who are living under occupation, who are not citizens of the state. And none of them are going anywhere. And what I want is for all of them to wake up in the morning and get their coffee and go to work and drop their kids at school and be, have a totally lovely and safe and maybe boring or not boring existence, which is what most of us want. And
Boring is good. I think in the
yeah,
Middle
boring is
East,
good.
boring is a win.
Fantastic. It's amazing. Also fulfilling and all of that. But right, but not to worry about war. And um, and this is true, obviously Palestinians in Gaza and, but also Israelis, like, every, my own family, friends, like everybody who has kids in Israel, you've got little kids who understand that when the siren goes off, you run into the shelter, right? Stories of little kids are playing with their dolls and the doll goes into the shelter because that's how you play. Like that is not actually a normal way to grow up. And it's not a normal way to grow up under bombs in Gaza and violence in the West Bank. Like it's not normal for anybody, or maybe it's too normal in the world, but it shouldn't be normal. And so I think that, that when people say like, oh, well, are we giving up on Israel? It's a very strange question to me because I don't know, are we giving up on Hungary? Are we giving up on Saudi Arabia? Are we like, what does that actually mean? Can we care about the people who live there and want to support the individuals or organizations that are fighting for their human rights there? I would think so. And I would think that that's our uh, that's our inclination. I mean, I think about Iran and the support. Not talking about the most recent war, but just when you had Iranian women who were protesting. I can't say it was in the top of the headlines, but there was support. And you didn't hear people saying, oh, well, that's a theocratic state, so we shouldn't even care about them. And basically, they can all just disappear. You don't hear that. You hear, let's support the people who are actually fighting for their rights and fighting for something to be better in the future.
This is where my pushback to that is not a pushback. I agree with you. It's that when people say, well, what about Saudi Arabia? Saudi Arabia, right? And I could speak as an American now, is no one believes Saudi Arabia is a democratic state. Saudi Arabia does not, or the Gulf states, we all know they're oppressive regimes, right? I think with Americans, the reason why with Israel, the feeling is with Israel, we have some levers. With Israel, maybe, just maybe, we can push those levers to effectuate change. With maybe if we speak out, maybe if we, protest, maybe, it might push Israel to stop occupying because of the deep-seated relationship, the special relationship between Israel and the United States of America, because of the billions of dollars of aid, because of the weapons, the missiles, because of the diplomatic support we give, and because of the double standard, right? Where we're witnessing right now, Zoran Mamdani, right, has to condemn chants he's never used, or anyone who's brown or Muslim or Palestinian, who speaks out for not just brown and Muslim, even Jews and white people, Latinos, the past year and a half, who've spoken out and criticized Israel at the risk of losing their jobs, right? At being censored, being called capos, self-hating Jews. So it's a different type of relationship, which is so deep-seated, which is why I think more people feel a sense of urgency and responsibility, and also to end the occupation. And my concern is that as some legacy organizations are doubling down, and as some defenders of Israel, for the reason that you mentioned, why they might feel like they have to defend, are doubling down, it is actually creating the type of fear that they imagine, right? Like what's going to happen is more people are going to hate Israel. It's going to be more and more pariah. Palestinians are completely effed. Like there was a video I saw of Gaza yesterday. My God, it was just, I thought it was like a scene from Blade Runner 2049. It's like the scene from Mars. It was just an annihilation. And then you got also what you've seen in the past year and a half is white supremacists, who are the number one domestic terror threat in America, are going to use this conflict, as they have, folks, to create cultural divisions and increase both anti-Semitism, anti-Muslim violence, and anti-Arab violence. It's just a recipe for disaster. Rabbi, I'll give you this final word. The way forward, what would you recommend? Is because I think you said something very wise and on point, a lot of wise gems. And I keep saying this also. To all the people who tell me to go back, I'm like, no one's going back. Brown people aren't going back. El Salvadorans aren't going back. Muslims aren't going back. Jews aren't going back. And I also say when it comes to Israel and Palestine, the futures are intertwined. No one's going back. even if you kick out all the Palestinians, it's just going to make matters worse. Like Israel is not going to be safer in any way, shape, or form, right? And the Jews who were born there and raised there, right? They're like, okay, listen, I'm not responsible for 48. Like I'm born here, so no one's going back. The futures are intertwined. A vision that you have in this present moment, where the majority in America can push towards something better. What do you recommend all of us do? Because so many people feel so helpless by what they're seeing, what's happening, but they nonetheless feel compelled to do something. And I'm asking you to put on your rabbi hat and give us this rabbinical wisdom of how we can move forward with love and compassion and also pursuit of justice.
Thanks. So first of all, I want to start with the human. Like I said, countries are not just kind of blobs in a map, right? They're made up of people, lots of different kinds of people with lots of different opinions and behaviors and everything else. And so, like I said, Israel, Palestine, it's about 15 million people or so between the river and the sea. And so I always want to start with my concern is that all of those people should be safe. And I would hope that everybody can start with that, including Israelis, including Palestinians. I should say Israelis are both Jewish and Palestinian, right? Because there's Palestinian citizens, but including Jews, including Palestinians, including other people who are living there. So I want to start with that. We, of course, the first thing that we learn about human beings in the Torah is that they're created in the image of God, and that is not about Jews. It's not about anybody. It's just the first person who we're all descended from equally. And so that is where I want to start. The second thing that I think we can do is to separate the government from the people. I think Americans should understand that very well, that we would hope that if we're traveling abroad, that we're not harassed or physically attacked by virtue of being American. That people get their human rights by being born, not by electing a good government. And so I think that we can make that distinction. And then the other thing is to support the people on the ground who are actually doing that work. So there's, desperate need for food aid in Gaza, of course. New Israel Fund, which is an Israeli and around the world organization, has raised more than $3 million for World Central Kitchen and some other organizations. So they're one place to go. Gaza Food Kitchen. I don't want to name a bunch of places to donate, but there's lots of places online that you can find to donate. And then also both Israeli and Palestinian and shared Jewish Palestinian organizations inside of Israel that are trying to civil society human rights organizations, which often find themselves in this gap where they're too Israeli for, let's say, the left outside of the country, and they're too left. They get attacked and marginalized and legislated against by the government, right? But those are the organizations you want to support. The same way that if I'm just going to point my finger at a map and pick a country that I want to try to be helpful in that country, the first thing I want to know is who are the civil society organizations that are working in that country? What are they trying to do? How could I support them? Not to say people are just picking this off a map, but this is the first question that you always want to ask. And so I think supporting those organizations, amplifying their voices, amplifying the voices of people who are supporting both Israelis and Palestinians, and also actually believing that there could be another future. Like the thing that I hear the most is, well, there's no hope. I'm just walking away. Two states didn't work. One state didn't work. All these things didn't work. We actually haven't tried anything, right? We never tried two states. It never happened. And let's actually decide what we want and fight for it. And I also want to say, just to take us back, 1973, the Yom Kippur War was brutal, right? There was Six-Day War in 1967, Yom Kippur War. And only a few years after the Yom Kippur War, there was a peace treaty with Egypt that was made between two former enemies, and then later with Jordan. And that peace treaty with Egypt, it has lasted more than about 5 decades. And it is not a warm, fuzzy peace. Israel and Egypt are not best friends. It's the cold peace. But I can't even imagine how many more people on both sides would have been killed in the last 50 years if that peace hadn't come about. And I think that is leaders who are not left wingers, right? But that is leaders who see that there's another possibility and there's something that you can build toward. And I don't think that's ever off the table. So that's my hope. And I think that everybody who cares about the region should invest in the people, invest in the people who are fighting for a better future, and invest ultimately in a solution and a political solution that's going to make sure that everybody can live in dignity with human rights, with self-determination.
Ultimately, this is a political problem, folks, that needs and requires a political solution. Anyone who says that Muslims and Palestinians or Muslims and, they lump us all together. Jews and Palestinians are cursed to be at war forever. It's nonsense. It's nonsense. This is not the way it has been. It's not the way it should be. And it's not the way it is. I give you Zoran Mamdani in the latest polls that came out that a lot of young Jewish Americans really like the guy and are rooting for him. He has a multiracial, multi-religious support, and they support him, especially the young Jews, not in spite of his opinions on Gaza, because of it. So I think it's important to shatter these very restrictive narratives that says, Jew versus Palestinian, Jew versus Muslim. It's nonsense. What we're up against is anti-oppression, anti-occupation, pro-justice, pro-peace. And again, none of us are going back. And especially in Israel, Palestine, you have to realize none of them are going back. Nobody's going back. And the Palestinians deserve a path towards self-determination, whether it's a one state, two states. It's not up to me. It's for the people to decide. And Israelis also have to live in security and peace. And this current government that unfortunately too many of our elected officials that is supporting, like I said, folks, 2 weeks ago when war criminal Netanyahu visited, for the third time, it was a bipartisan support where Chuck Schumer was there smiling. That's not the way. You can't sit there and criticize Netanyahu and then once he drives drunk and kills people, say, "Okay, Netanyahu, here's the Porsche. Don't do it again this time." So it's up to us. It's up to us. And our voices are making a difference. And Rabbi Jill's voice is so important, what specifically the rabbinical voice speaking out against this atrocious, obscene war and these war crimes, I think goes a long way to building this momentum that inshallah, that this situation will end and that there will be peace. Before I let you go, as I let you go, I know you're Jewish, like me, as a son of immigrants, as a Muslim, we're terrible at this. Shamelessly promote yourself, Rabbi Jill. How can people support you?
Thank you so much. Well, I'm the CEO of an organization called Trua. We're an organization of more than 2,300 member rabbis and cantors across the U.S. and Canada. We have rabbis and cantors in 47 states and 6 provinces. And our rabbis are in synagogues, they're on campuses, they are in day schools, camps, etc. They're everywhere that clergy are, and they are fighting for human rights, both here at home. We didn't talk about the United States, but they've also been out protesting in front of ICE centers and accompanying immigrants and etc. and fighting for democracy here, as well as fighting for a better future for Israelis and Palestinians. So come to our website. It's Truah, TRUAH.org. And of course, we rely on everybody's financial support. Our fiscal year ends the end of September, so we're always very grateful to that support, which makes it possible for us to do the work that we're doing.
And I believe nonprofit, so tax deductible, correct?
Absolutely tax deductible.
That's the attorney in me. Rabbi Jill, thank you for taking the time. I really appreciate it. Folks, thank you for tuning in. Almost 900 people. I finally was able to fix this glitch. Sorry that I couldn't see your comments. This has been The Left Hook. There are no paywalls. Everything's free. If you have a few dollars, give it to Trua and Rabbi Jill. If you have a few dollars after that, send it over to my way. It goes a long way. I'm independent. Be kind to each other. Be empathetic. Always speak out. We're living in some fascinating times, but we cannot give in to cynicism and apathy. We still have to remain hopeful, but hope is not enough. Hope requires action. And sometimes that means just speaking up and doing the right thing. Folks, I'll be back at 4 p.m. with Mary Trump. She'll be talking about the deterioration and decline of her uncle, Donald, who Adam told me was on the roof of the White House today, as one is. Do you feel better, folks? Do you feel comforted? I don't. But folks, come back and please, oh please, don't be a fascist. Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you so much.
Take care.